Hello, everybody. This is Deanna Minnick. Welcome to the Detox Summit. Today, our special guest is David Wolfe, who, as many of you know, is a health, eco, nutrition, and natural beauty expert. I call him the king of superfoods. Others have referred to him as the rock star of superfoods and longevity, especially because of his advocacy for all of the different foods that promote vitality in the body. So things like cacao and various mushrooms. And so I'm sure we're going to hear all about these foods and how they tie into detox. So welcome, David, to the summit.
Thank you so much. Great to be a part of the summit.
So I think we'll start first just by having you tell us a little bit about you. And, how did you get down this path of eco, nutrition, superfoods? What led you here?
Well, it's like this old phrase that the Romans had. They say that one who denies their fate will be dragged by the fates, and one who aligns with their destiny will be carried by the fates. And so it was just that alignment. I was very lucky early on to get aligned with what I'm supposed to be really doing on the planet. And my main work has been in the field of nutrition and health science and, all the accoutrement that goes along with the best nutrition ever. And really, my role is bringing the whole thing to the next level. Like wherever we were with protein powders or egg whites or, calcium supplements, just take that whole paradigm and let's just get it to the, where we're really going, kind of the iPhone or smartphone level of technology. And that's what I've been doing the last 20 years. And now things like superfoods and maca and cacao and goji berries are mainstream. Chia seeds like a mainstream thing now. There was a time when it was a little niche thing that us in the superfoods world, there's about 6 of us, and that we thought maybe one day in 100 years this will be a big thing, but it happened in 20 years. So it's very exciting to be a part of this, and it's great to ride a tsunami. The people are ready, and we're ready to bring them the best food ever.
Well, I'm curious, since you are such a pioneer in the natural products world and in superfoods, what are you seeing on the horizon coming up? So since we've already seen the manifestation of a lot of these foods already and they're in mainstream grocery stores, what's on the horizon? What's new?
Well, what's happening is we're getting a much tighter look at anti-aging technology and anti-aging nutrition. And there's been great breakthroughs. For example, a lot of the work that Suzanne Summers has done in bringing light to the whole issue of hormones. I just wrote a whole book on that subject. That's an amazing subject, and that's one piece of it. But the piece that I'm really into, because I'm in the field of nutrition, which hormones are affected by nutrition. But my main thing really is about the foods, is about focusing down on resveratrol, which is the very purple phenolic compound that's in grapes and in wines, especially dark wines like high phenolic wines, and they're related compounds in not only in grapes but in other plants like hops, and also in the cannabis plant, which the related compound there is called CBD or cannabidiol, and looking at these compounds. Another one is quercetin, by the way. So quercetin, resveratrol, xanthohumol, and CBD, how they're related and how they can be concentrated to affect an anti-aging revolution.
How do you think that, so when you mentioned resveratrol, xanthohumol, and quercetin, how do you think that these 3 compounds are affecting mechanisms related to longevity?
They're super epigenetic compounds, which means that they, like, for example, if your cells are being taken over by viruses, it's about a 20-step process for a cell to be overcome by viruses. Resveratrol and xanthohumol stop that process at stage 1 and 2. So they're very powerful antiviral compounds. They send out, basically what they do is they turn on the genes that are associated with longevity and with health and with immunity. The only thing that's really on par with resveratrol and quercetin and xanthohumol and CBD as well, is vitamin D3 in terms of its epigenetic power to turn on the healing and to keep us young longer. And this is really, quite a big discovery. I just was meeting with a scientist again about this just the other day, just constantly staying up on where the research is at. And what we're really looking at is not genes, genetics. That field ended like 40 years ago. What we're really more focused on is epigenetics. What turns on the healing genes? What turns on the genes that help us to live long? Because your genetics aren't really the big story. It's really about the epigenetics. What's flipping on the correct genes? And these compounds are very powerful master compounds in this regard.
So, one of the foods that I'm surprised that you didn't mention as having epigenetic effects is the cruciferous family of vegetables. What are your thoughts on broccoli, especially since we're talking about detox? What's your vision of cruciferous vegetables on the epigenetic regulation?
Very powerful. The sulforaphane in the cruciferous vegetables, which are the sulfuric compounds, you detect it sometimes in broccoli. You definitely detect it more presently in Brussels sprouts. It's kind of a sulfury bite that these things have, a little bit of a spice. Those sulforaphanes are some of the most powerful epigenetic compounds known. In fact, they're the first line of what I'd recommend if somebody has low Jing when they're born, which means they either have a birth defect or they have undeveloped kidneys or liver, or they're neurologically not developed fully when they're born or when they're young. The sulforaphanes would be in that first line of things that I would recommend. And cruciferous vegetables overall, in my opinion, are of the greatest caliber of vegetables because not only do they have those sulforaphanes, but they also have these interesting derivative compounds from the brassicales, which are these compounds like diindole methane, DIM, and I3C, indole 3 carbinol. And these are really interesting compounds with respect to hormones, with respect to breaking down toxic estrogens in our system, which, by the way, since we're on a detox summit, my opinion is that as we age, the number one toxin in our body and in our liver is actually toxic estrogen metabolites. And that those are the things that if we survive the heart attacks and the strokes and whatever, those are the things that will eventually get us unless we do something very specific about it. And cruciferous vegetables contain those exact things that can do something about it. So we've got the DIM, the indole 3 carbinol, the sulforaphanes, and then the calcium D-glucarate, which is the fiber that pulls all the toxins right out of the body. So, cruciferous vegetables, like for babies, highly recommended. In fact, I've been hanging out with a 15-month-old the last few months. It's been really cool. And we've been feeding her Brussels sprouts for breakfast every morning. That's what she has every morning.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah. How about that one?
How does she get it? I was just going to ask you. So how do you make cruciferous vegetables tasty, especially for a 15-month-year-old?
Well, for a 15-month-year-old, you can't feed them raw Brussels sprouts. So we have some really awesome olive oil. In fact, I just had some shipped fresh from Greece. And it's like I actually ice pressed olive oil, and so we put that in there, and then we cook that in. It's called 316T stainless steel. It's the best cookware in the world, and then so I'll make that up for her and put about 15 Brussels sprouts in there, and cook that for maybe 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and then they're softened up and they're ready to eat. I'll put a little bit of our Arctic Icelandic flake salt on there, and maybe put a little bit of coconut oil on there right after, and then kind of dice it up and then feed it to her, and she just loves it. It's amazing.
Now, you're also, in my mind, the king of smoothies and making shakes and really blending things up, pulverizing them. Have you ever created a cruciferous smoothie that tastes good?
That's a great question. I do that on TV quite a bit. I'm the face behind the NutriBullet. A lot of people see the NutriBullet on TV, or you see it in Bed Bath and Beyond or Costco or these places. And so I go on TV a lot. I go on the Home Shopping Network and I'm making things. And a lot of times I'll put straight cabbage, straight Brussels sprouts, straight broccoli right into a smoothie. Right in there, because the NutriBullet can literally liquefy that stuff in 10 seconds, and then serve it to people who are they're on fast food. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they like it. They're like, wow, I could actually drink this, because it's really interesting when you blend these things up. Sometimes the taste is really quite different than eating it, and it appears that that's the case with these cruciferous vegetables.
And do you think that through the blending that you're impacting any of these epigenetic compounds in positive or negative ways?
Well, one of the things about blending that I really like, there's two factors at work. One is, especially with the NutriBullet, you're working with a vortex. And the vortex, in my mind, in my research, I'm a student of the physicist Nassim Haramein, who's also my neighbor. And we believe that the vortex is the formative structural force in nature. Basically, to create anything and for any formation of anything to be built up, you need a vortex of some sort or another. And the destructive energy is the energy of like fire that dissipates things out perpendicularly, whereas a vortex spirals things inward. And once you have that kind of understanding, when you're looking at a blender, it's a vortex. So it's part of that formative energy. So that's the one thing. The second thing is that the blender is also chewing that food up 10,000 times in a minute. It's spinning at 20,000 RPM. So you're getting that material broken up into small particles, which creates a more surface area, and therefore you can absorb everything better. And this kind of research is just really underway now. There's a whole bunch of research going, like moving forward, on how much of these nutrients are entering the bloodstream due to blending versus just eating it.
Oh,
and it's pretty significant.
One of the concerns that patients raise to me, at least, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, and I'm curious how you address it, is getting all of these green foods and taking them in and having the impact of things like goitrogens and impacting their thyroid. One of the Detox Summit experts, Lise Alschuler, who actually had breast cancer, and she's a naturopathic physician, she talks about steaming her kale before she puts it into the blender. So I'm just curious, is that something that has come up, or are people concerned, or do the health benefits outweigh anything like that?
It really depends on the person. It's a metabolic issue. Some people are more sensitive or they already have thyroid issues, so they want to actually steam or cook their cruciferous vegetables before consuming them in order to break down the goitrogens. There's no definitive research, by the way, on whether goitrogens are broken down by blending. It appears possible that they are broken down by blending, but we need to have some definitive research on that. But that's kind of interesting, just to give us an idea of how sensitive these compounds are. But goitrogens are the compounds in cruciferous vegetables, for those of us who are listening and don't know about this, that can be irritating to the thyroid. And so in small amounts, like 5 servings of cruciferous vegetables a day, or I'm sorry, a week, not a day. A day would be a lot, but five servings a week, or 4 or 5 servings a week, it's not that big a deal for most of the population.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with cancer or something, and you have also a thyroid issue, you may want to cook or steam your cruciferous vegetables before consuming them, just because of the goitrogen issue.
That's a really good point. So I'm just curious, David, if we can just kind of zoom out, and you're very much in favor of, just like Rainbow is, how do we create planetary health? And when we create people health, we create planet health. And so one of the issues as it relates to talking about detox is toxicity, and a toxicity on the planet. You've traveled a lot. What are you seeing as it relates to toxins in food, or just toxins in the environment? Are you seeing an escalation?
Well, I think we're seeing a universal escalation in plastics in the environment. We're just now in certain areas starting to turn it around, where, for example, like in the San Francisco Bay Area, you're not allowed to use plastic bags at the grocery store anymore, right? They've banned it. So we're just starting to see a turnaround of all this plastic, and we're starting to see a return to glass. One of my favorite ads I saw a couple of years ago was Celine Cousteau, Jacques Cousteau's granddaughter, and she's sitting there with all these bottles of glass next to the ocean, and the caption says, "Let's go back to glass." And that ad ran in like National Geographic, a lot of the biggest magazines in the world. And we do need to go back to glass because of the plastics toxicity, BPA toxicity, toxicity of the binders, basically the things that hold the plastic together. Basically, what's going to happen with the plastic over time is it's going to particulate. It's going to break into smaller and smaller particles. But the binding agents that hold that plastic together are even more toxic than the plastic itself. That's what BPA is. So the plastic toxicity is an area that it really, it has me activated. I think it's a big cause of breast cancer and reproductive cancers because it creates, it's a xenoestrogen. So it creates these estrogen metabolites that your liver will kind of like process it, however it can. And some of those estrogen metabolites, as they build up over your lifetime, can be very, very dangerous and start to instigate the growth of different types of cancers, especially reproductive cancers.
Exactly. And are there other toxins that you have concerns about outside of the plastics?
I have a particular pet peeve for radiation. You
Mm-hmm.
can't see it, you can't
Mm-hmm.
smell it, you can't taste it, you can't detect it unless you have special equipment. And the whole idea of like radiation power and the nuclear power industry and all that is just an absolute aberration of consciousness. And I can't believe that we even went there, or even what we're basically doing. And let me just bring it all the way back to how this was all figured out, because most of us are not aware. Where you have radioactive rock, like in granite on the Canadian Shield or in the middle of the Australian continent, the rock is always hot. In the middle of the night, you touch the rock and it's hot. And ancient peoples and indigenous and aboriginal peoples always were like, you stay away from that stuff. It's dangerous and toxic. But the kind of Western civilization was like, oh, wait, it's always hot. Why don't we distill out what's hot about it and make it, and then irritate it with neutrons, namely refine the uranium out of the granite and then irritate it with neutrons and then use that to drive steam engines. That's what a nuclear power plant is. It is the most toxic, the most ridiculous, the most unbelievably dangerous thing ever. And it's a particular pet peeve of mine. And I always like to put it out there. It's like, we have got to put an end to that level of consciousness that even creates that kind of a thing. It can never be cleaned up. It's going to create, every nuclear power plant on Earth will be a toxic waste site for millions of years. And it's just an absolute aberration of consciousness. So for me, the plutonium, uranium toxicity, the radioactive iodine toxicity, radioactive cesium, radioactive strontium, this is some of the worst stuff ever.
Well, it is. And what do we do about it? Do you think that there are food solutions to mop up the radiation? What can we do from a lifestyle and food perspective? We may not be able to address the larger issue of getting rid of this, but what can we do if we're exposed, especially if we live on the west coast of the United States, where we might see more contamination in water? Are there certain foods that you think could have protective effects?
Yes, definitely. We know that the laminaria and some of the brown seaweed concentrates are very protective against radiation. We know that chaga mushroom, chaga mushroom is very protective against radiation. We also know that reishi mushroom is also effective. Asparagus root is very well known for protecting the body against gamma radiation. And I'm a big fan of asparagus root. I love asparagus, but the root of asparagus is considered in the top 3 herbs in Chinese medicine and in Ayurvedic medicine. So we really need to talk about it more. And I like the minerals boron. Boron's a very powerful radiation protector, and like just a small amount, 4 milligrams a day. Boron is present in many different supplements that are out there. I like zeolites a lot. Zeolites
Mm-hmm.
are really good.
Mm-hmm.
I like iodine, taking iodine to displace or protect yourself from absorbing radioactive iodine. And I'm seeing more and more people getting into doing at least low dose iodine. I was doing high dose iodine. I found out it was too much for me. I was getting actually iodine overdose. So I backed off to low dose iodine. That seems to really be working for me. And then there's a whole litany of other things that you can do to detoxify the radioactivity, even infrared saunas, where you get in there, you basically let those infrared heaters kind of cook into your body and allow your body to detoxify some of those heavy metals, of which uranium is obviously a heavy metal, cesium is a heavy metal, strontium is a heavy metal.
That's fantastic, because that question comes up time and time again, and I just don't know if there's enough research. But the things that you're mentioning make good sense. Perhaps you can talk with us a little bit more about mushrooms. I think that people are really curious, and I happen to live pretty close to Paul Stamets, who is one of the leaders in that arena. And I'm just kind of curious if you can just take us down the path of what mushrooms can do for us in terms of our immune system, our detoxification systems.
I'm so glad you brought that up. This is one of the great detoxification foods of all. And really, it's not a food. It's really more in the herbal category. It's one of the great categories of life. When you look at the planet Earth, we've got archaea, which are the organisms, the extremophile organisms that live at the volcanic vents underneath the ocean, that live inside the Earth. We've got bacteria, which we're all familiar with. We've got plants and animals, and then we have mushrooms. And mushrooms are categorized actually as animals in the Linnaean categorization system, but that's just, how we categorize it. I really think they're their own life form, their own category, and they are our assistants in developing ecosystems. Without the mushrooms, there can be no forests. Without the mushrooms, we can't exist. And the great mushrooms, the top of the chain, the polypores, the noble mushrooms, these are tree-eating mushrooms for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part. They are immunological super herbs. or superfoods, however you want to categorize them. And chaga and reishi are like king and queen. Those are the two that you start with, chaga and reishi. And they're immunological food, and they build an immunological momentum. And this is why it's important for detoxification, is because at least 50% of your detoxification mechanisms are immunological. And so if we don't have enough white blood cells, or we don't have sophisticated enough white blood cells with the right and correct weaponry, then we will not be able to detoxify our bodies as well as maybe someone else, or as well as we could. And so this to me has always been a very critical part about detoxification. It's immunological nutrition. And when I say that, I'm not talking about echinacea or garlic, which is our immune system stimulants. I'm talking about the dual directional nature of reishi and chaga and maitake and shiitake and agaricus blazei and cordyceps and the other, litany of great mushrooms out there, the phalinus group of mushrooms, and there's many of them. There's at least 24 of them that I currently work with. And these are able to actually help your immune system to develop a momentum. It's actually food for your white blood cells, direct food for your white blood cells. And that to me is really a critical and missing piece of detoxification lore and literature.
So what's the best way to prepare them? Of these 24 mushrooms, is there a certain way that they get coupled, or do you put certain combinations together for synergy, or, just how does one navigate the whole terrain of mushrooms? It's so vast.
Yeah, it's a vast area, but it's really actually quite easy. And what you want to do is you want to start where you're at and with what you understand. I started with reishi mushroom capsules that I was buying in a health food store in LA. That's where I started about a dozen years ago. And that turned me into a wild reishi mushroom hunter. I've hunted reishi mushroom on every continent on Earth except for Antarctica, at this point. And even in the Amazon, I found reishi mushroom in the Amazon. So you got to, I didn't start there. I started at a health food store. But that's where it can go. And the sophistication goes like this. You start with the encapsulated products. Then you start looking at maybe the alcohol extracted products, because those are a little bit more antiviral, a little bit more fast acting, and they have a little bit more anti-tumor, anti-cancer properties. And then you start going, well, maybe I can just get bulk powders and throw the stuff into like smoothies and drinks, which is, really happening on the internet in a major way now, because, the whole blender thing has gotten, finally it's broken out of its shell. And all of a sudden people are like, wait, I don't want to open up these capsules. Why don't I just throw the powders in and I can get it cheaper on the internet? So you can get all these mushroom powders cheaper on the internet in bulk, and then play around that way. And then eventually you might want to get into, okay, let's go to an herb shop online and buy the whole actual mushroom and then make a tea out of it. Like actually like cook it as a tea, the same way you'd make green tea or black tea, or the same way you'd make, whatever tea you're into, Pau d'Arco tea or whatever one you're into. And then you start getting to the point where you're ready to start mushroom hunting. And it starts with the easy ones to recognize and identify, which is chaga and reishi, because reishi has like a bone lacquered red color. It's unmistakable in the forest. And then chaga is this like growth it's a black growth that comes off of birch trees. And then from there, you can go, okay, now we can get into the lion's manes. Now we can get into the phalinus. Now we can get into the foliotas and just expand out. And that's kind of where I'm at this point, is I basically hunt mushrooms all summer and into the fall, and then I dry them in the sun, and then I have them all winter for tea.
That sounds fabulous. So mushrooms are up there in your top 10, of course.
For sure.
And I would say that cacao seems like another one, right? This is another area of focus for you.
Yeah, this is a funny thing between Paul Stamets and I, actually, is Paul's like, in order to save the planet, we need to have mushrooms, right? And I agree with him, except who's going to eat the mushrooms unless they're blended in with chocolate?
Exactly.
So, this is the biggest problem with all of this, is like, hey, if you're not going to eat it, it ain't happening, right? If you're going to do a detox protocol, but you have to eat the stuff, and the stuff tastes awful, you might be able to force yourself to do it for a little while, but in the long term, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So chocolate's an amazing delivery system, and I do want to say this about food and about chocolate in general, is that any food has a toxic limit. And it doesn't matter. It could be lettuce, it could be dandelion, it could be bell peppers, it could be apples. There's an upper limit for everything. It could be water. Water has its upper limit as well. So when people are like, when we get into this platitude business of like, all that's toxic and all this isn't, is It's really not correct. I mean, the real correct answer to that is it's all dose dependent. And I want to mention that because there is this confusion out there in the world about food. And it's like, oh, I can't eat that. It's toxic. It's like, no, it's probably not toxic. But if you ate it every day for a year, it probably would be toxic to you. You know what I mean? So everything's is dose dependent. And this comes up a lot with chocolate. It's like, how much chocolate's okay? Well, if you're eating chocolate every 10 minutes, it's probably not okay. But if you're eating chocolate as a reward for yourself after a job well done every evening, or every at the end of the weekend or whatever, great, no big deal. And that's the right dosage and the right way to think about it.
What would be the downsides of having chocolate during a detox? Because usually when people go through a cleanse, they eliminate chocolate. Why is that?
I don't know.
I want to bring it back.
Yeah, no, there's actually a whole change in that area. Actually, a friend of mine just wrote a detox book called The Raw Chocolate Diet. And it's about how to get all these herbs into your body using chocolate as the delivery system, which is with a blender, it's become so easy. You just take all these herbs as powders, throw them in there, or take all the herbs, make a tea out of it, and then blend it into a hot chocolate, right? Just take your raw cacao and maybe a little bit of almond butter, a little bit of maca, a little bit of honey, and you blend all your herbs right in there with the chocolate, and you got like an herbal hot chocolate. And I've lived that for months at a time, just herbal hot chocolates every day, all day long. That's what you do in the winter in Canada. It's like that's all you got.
It's a necessity.
It's a necessity.
And I think that sometimes people worry about the caffeine and just caffeine overload, and then chocolate also has histamines in it. And I don't know if people think about that, but if people are sensitive, there might be a reason to pull back.
Yeah, chocolate's a nut. Actually, it's the most widely eaten nut in the whole world that nobody actually eats. We all eat a processed form of it. And that's a really interesting concept because a lot of people have nut allergies. They have nut and seed allergies. And so they could be allergic to chocolate, even though chocolate allergies are less common than other nut allergies, interestingly. But chocolate is a source of theobromine. It's a very poor source of caffeine, actually. This is, in the chocolate industry, this is very well known, actually, that chocolate is very poor source of caffeine, very good source of theobromine. Theobromine is a caffeine metabolite, and it's a methylxanthine stimulant. So it's in that same family as caffeine, but it's more of a cardiovascular stimulant, less of a central nervous system stimulant, which is what caffeine is. And so when you're detoxing, you may want to get off of all of those kinds of things. And that's if you're doing an adrenal cleanse and you want to just get completely off of any stimulants, then you get off the chocolate. But if you're doing a different type of cleanse, then chocolate might be appropriate.
That's a really novel aspect, to think about incorporating chocolate into a cleanse. And of course, when we're talking chocolate, I think you and I are talking the high percentage of cocoa polyphenols, not the milk chocolate, right? Not the sugar and dairy.
Right. Yeah. I don't really have anything to do with whatever that is. Whatever that was, let me just rephrase. I don't know what that whole sugar business was and all whatever, that's like an aberration of consciousness in my mind. Basically, where we're at right now is we have the best quality raw chocolate ever imagined in the history of the world. It's available online. It's available basically almost even in your health food stores now. And you just don't even need to be thinking about that other stuff anymore. I grew up on Nestle Quick. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Man, you talk about toxic. I mean, I don't know what kind of crazy chemicals were in there, but it was gnarly stuff. We're a million miles from that reality now. And that just shows you how much better things are getting and how fast.
Right. And, you're mentioning this word consciousness, and I'm just curious if our eating patterns are connected to our consciousness. So if we are moving towards, and I think you're going to say yes and probably exclaim it, but, there's kind of this dichotomy, right? There's almost like, our planet's becoming more toxic. So does that denote that we're becoming less conscious? Because then there are these pockets where we do see the emergence of certain foods that you're speaking to that are helping us. So I'm just curious about your take on consciousness and if that ties into what's happening on the toxin side.
There's an absolute connection between the toxicity of our world and our state of consciousness, and also the change in the toxicity in our world and the change in our state of consciousness. And we're seeing both things happen, whereas we have totally like the most ridiculous levels of consciousness, the most absurd, almost preposterous levels of like behavior. And then we have, and the consciousness that goes with it. And then we have on the other side, the most amazing things happening, the most unbelievable detox protocols, the most outrageous anti-aging longevity strategies and understandings and breakthroughs. And it's both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so the planet is getting simultaneously more unconscious and more conscious at the same time. That's how I call it. That's how I see it. I think that's what the reality is.
Right.
And so it's what's happening is that the unconsciousness eventually runs headlong into pain. Is kind of, that's nature's kind of guardrail. And the pain just gets greater and greater and greater and greater until somebody snaps out of it. So we're going to see both those accelerating, both types of consciousness accelerating, and hopefully the higher path wins.
I hope so too. And you're part of that mission as much as I am too, and really trying to bring that visibility forth. What would in your mind, how would you like to do a detox? Have you done many detoxes yourself where you found that, there's one that seems to work better than others? Or is it just the time of your life, what you've been exposed to? But there must be some essentials of a detox program in your mind.
There's always essentials. I mean, when I think of detoxing, I think of colonics. Just sometimes you have to unplug the bathtub. You got to pull the plug and drain the dirty water out. And there's no other way. You can't just keep putting more water in. You have to actually unplug it. And so that comes up a lot for me in my thinking. It's like a lot of people are full of what. And and so just unplugging that tub. Then another thing that comes up a lot is thinning down what we're eating, going to liquid food or going to juices or going to water. That comes up a lot for me with detox. Another one that comes up a lot for me is resting, eyes closed saunas, right? Like being in the sauna. And actually, when you close your eyes, 80% of your whole cortex of your brain is taken up by visual stimuli. So just closing your eyes and resting. And then if you can fit that into a sauna program, like over a long weekend or something like that, is really, really a good way to detoxify yourself, because it just allows your brain to go focus on other things except, instead of all this visual stimuli.
Right. So why the thinning down of food, if you can just speak to that a little bit, is that because we have such bad digestive tracts that we need to help them out? And
even if, I think yes, but I think even if your digestive tract is good, there's just waste that accumulates. It's like just damage, over time, that you're eating food, and it's just eating food every day is really not even natural, like just eat food every day. It's like we never really were doing that, until really recently in our history. And so to me, I really feel like, okay, anytime you can get a rest from food is really a good thing, or to go to liquid foods is really a good thing. And then you feel the lightness of being. For example, 2 days ago, I was with the guy who runs our nonprofit organization. We were having this very conversation, and he said something I've heard over and over again. If I don't eat anything, I feel great. As soon as I eat anything, I feel like tired, feel run down. I mean, I hear that every day. And that just shows you that food, yes, it nourishes you, but it can also detract as well. And sometimes you just need to take a break. You're not going to starve. It's okay. Everything's going to be fine. If you feel like you're hypoglycemic, no problem. Lie down and rest. Don't move. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to die. You're going to make it. And this original experience that I had with fasting back in the early days really changed my whole life around. Because now, like, I'm in the airport yesterday and I'm thinking, I want to go get something to nibble on. Then I'm like, they don't have anything here. No, I'm going to just wait. And so I'll just hold out for 2 or 3 hours because I have my experience fasting. And so I have that discipline built in. That's a really, really powerful thing. It's really, really good to have that. Now, where I'm at with this whole thing and detoxing, and what really I like to do, and I did this last year for 5 or 6 days. I actually did, I did almost 6 days with no food or water.
Wow.
And that's just kind of it was the best thing I'd done for myself in years.
So tell us about your process. What happened?
Well, one thing that you have to consider is you don't ever want to do that unless you're really hydrated and you're really familiar with detoxing and running detox retreats, which we like to do. I've done those all over the world, where we do a 10-day cleanse and we basically strip the food down, then we get right into the middle of it. Then it's a fast, and then we're doing colonics every day, and then we're doing flushes, we're flushing our system out with salt water or whatever. And so, you kind of to have that experience over long years before you get to the point of dry fasting. But basically, what I'll do is I'll get everything out of my intestines. Everything's out. Like there's nothing left in there. And then I'll get hydrated and then I'll just go, boom, and just no food or water. And what's interesting about that is that your body has the innate machinery, the innate equipment for you to survive. You could go much longer without food and water than what we're being told, for sure, especially if we're non-toxic. The more toxic you are, the less distance you can go because you'll drown in your own waste. But the more clean you are, the longer you can go without food and water.
Mm-hmm. Did you notice a difference in your thinking and just even in your skin, your eyes? Did you have real physical, whether subtle or more dramatic effects that you noticed?
It's so powerful. It's so amazing. I mean, like clarity, like you close your eyes and the visualization of anything in your mind is so sharp. I could think about stuff, like go back into my mind to places, things that I'd seen that is just sharp and crisp. And it seems like, whenever you're just in your normal day routine of eating food in your normal life, your recall isn't quite as sharp, as vivid as when you're fasting. But when you do a dry fast, with no food or water, the Russians found out that that's how you can detoxify your body of radioactive tritium, which is, by the way, a very prevalent radioactive molecule. It's radioactive hydrogen. For example, all municipal water districts in America are contaminated with radioactive tritium. All. Any tap water you turn on in North America is contaminated with radioactive tritium. Stuff like that. And, so I'm privy to that kind of research. And plus it's a challenge, to dry fast is really, really difficult and challenging. And I just, I feel like that's kind of where I want to be. And when I came off of that, I broke that with coconut water. It was just like, it was an amazing feeling. It was the best thing I'd done in years.
Nice. Well, I've interviewed others like Alejandro Younger, who talks about his experience doing the same. And, there's really different gradations of detox, the fast of nothing, the dry fast, to juicing, to different foods, to supplements. So it's just really interesting to hear your experience. David, how would you like to really encapsulate everything that you've talked about? What would be 3 takeaways for the listeners, 3 actionables? How do we move from all this great information that you mentioned into our daily life? What would be the top 3?
Well, I think number one is you've got to give your body a break every now and then. You need to rest. You need to detoxify. You need to give your digestive system a rest. And you need to cleanse your bowels. And I like to do those at least 4 times a year, and preferably right at the change of the seasons. That appears to be a very good time for cleansing. So that would be the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the 2 equinoxes. And you'll find, if you really, really pay attention, if you've really been doing this for a long time, you'll find that you just want to fast during those times anyway. It just kind of happens naturally. So that's one takeaway. Number 2 is you've got to have some immunological nutrition in order to get your immune system to help your body to detoxify itself. Your white blood cells they're experts at detoxifying you. They know exactly what to do. Let's feed them. And one of the best categories of foods to feed them is the mushrooms, the medicinal mushrooms, or the tree mushrooms, or polypores, of which chaga and reishi are the greatest. They're the best ever. And then I think the third one is, when you do fast and you do cleanse and you do this kind of stuff, just keep in mind that nature's solution to pollution is dilution. Nature's solution to pollution is dilution. That's something I've had in the back of my mind all these years. I think it's really helped me. Nature's solution to pollution is dilution. So drink more juices, drink more water, you flush your system out more, and take that time to really, hydrate. And I think that's where you're going to get some significant changes in the way you feel and in the efficacy of your detoxification protocols.
Excellent. 3 really great takeaways that can be implemented straight away. So, David, how can people reach you? How can they get more information on your products, especially those mushroom products? What would be the best conduits?
One of my favorites actually is Instagram. I'm a real big fan of Instagram. I got so tired of Facebook. There's just too many buttons and switches and bells and whistles. So Instagram.com/David Avocado Wolfe. It's AVOCADOWOLFE. You can find me there. You can find me at twitter.com, David Wolfe, WOLFE. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com, David Avocado Wolfe. But I don't post as much on Facebook as I do on Instagram. And then my website is davidwolfe.com, DAVIDWOLFE.com.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for being part of the Detox Summit. And again, I see this as a movement to get people and planet back into order, and really that we feel good in our bodies, we feel clean, and to what you said before, that we feel vital.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for everybody who's listening out there. Go out and detox and get that feeling of well-being coursing through your veins.